Welcome to the Am I Free to Go podcast, where the Constitution isn't just paper, it's ammo. I'm your host, Soundrone, with Soundbite News Media. Here on the podcast, we don't just talk about your rights. We lock, load, and defend them. We expose censorship, spotlight real amendment battles, and bring you the stories the mainstream's too scared to touch. So whether you're behind a mic, behind a badge, or behind enemy lines on social media, this is your front line in the fight for free speech. Strap in, speak up, and never ask permission, because around here, we know the truth. You are free to go. Episode number 6. Terry stops in the Fourth Amendment, those awkward moments when you're not arrested, but you're also not free to leave. Officers only need reasonable suspicion, which is like probable cause's little brother. We'll explain how these stops work, and what to do if one happens to you. First step is don't panic, don't run, and maybe don't crack donut jokes. Quite yet, that is.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're tackling a really big one today. Got a stack of material here covering police stops, searches, and, well, the legal stuff behind them.
Yeah.
We're really going to dig into something you've probably heard mentioned, the Terry stop.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we're drawing from, well, a pretty broad mix. We've got online discussions, forums,
Right.
official legal documents, some deep court case analysis, and also, importantly, guidance from civil rights groups.
So our mission here is to try and cut through some of the noise, understand where this all began, what the rules are supposed to be, how they've maybe changed, and, look hard at the controversies and the impact this has in the real world, especially when we talk about race.
And just to be clear, we're sticking strictly to what's in these sources we have in front of us.
Exactly, only the sources. Okay, so where does this start? The beginning.
Right. You got to go back to the Supreme Court. 1968, a case called Terry v. Ohio. That's the cornerstone.
So what happened in Terry? What was the situation?
Okay, so you've got this veteran Cleveland police officer. He sees these guys acting, well, suspiciously, pacing back and forth, peering into a store window again and again. Looks like they might be casing the joint for a robbery. That's his read.
Okay.
So he approaches them, asks what's going on, gets some mumbled answers, doesn't feel right. So he grabs one of them, John Terry, pats down his outer coat, and finds a gun. A revolver.
And the court.
Yeah.
What did they say about that? Was that okay?
Well, this is where it gets really significant. The court said yes, under certain conditions. They ruled that police can stop someone, detain them briefly, if they have something called reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is happening or about to happen.
Reasonable suspicion. Okay, and that's different from needing probable cause for an arrest.
Right. Exactly. It's a lower standard than probable cause.
Yeah.
Key difference. But it lets police intervene sooner based on suspicion.
So they don't need proof yet, just a solid, specific reason to be suspicious.
Right. And the court also addressed the pat-down, the frisk. They said if the officer also has a separate reasonable suspicion that the person they stopped might be armed and dangerous.
Okay, separate suspicion.
Yes. Then they could do a limited pat-down.
Yeah.
Just the outer clothing. And this is the only reason to define weapons. It's about officer safety during the stop.
So wait, the suspicion for the stop itself, I think you might be planning a crime. That's one thing. And then suspicion for the frisk, I think you might have a weapon. That's another separate justification they need.
Precisely. You need grounds for the stop, and then you need additional grounds for the frisk. They don't automatically go together.
Got it. And this reasonable suspicion, RAS they call it sometimes.
Yeah, RA.
It's lower than probable cause, but it can't just be a gut feeling.
No, definitely not just a hunch. That's really clear in the sources. The officer has to be able to point to specific and articulable facts.
Articulable facts, meaning?
Meaning they have to be able to explain why they were suspicious based on concrete details they observed or knew, not just he looked wrong.
So more like he was pacing for 10 minutes, kept looking in the window, seemed to be conferring with the others, that kind of thing.
Exactly, that kind of thing. Specific behaviors. Now, these sources also emphasize that not all police interactions are created equal. There are different levels.
Right. Okay, so what are the levels?
Well, the lowest level, legally speaking, is what they call a consensual encounter.
Consensual.
Meaning an officer could just walk up, say hello, ask you some questions. They don't need any level of suspicion to do that.
Okay. And the key part for the person being approached.
You are totally free to leave. You don't have to answer their questions. You can just walk away.
So how do you know if it is consensual? Can you just ask?
Yeah, people often use that test, asking, am I free to go, or am I being detained? If the answer is yes, or they don't stop you, it's likely consensual.
But here's something interesting the sources mention. Police don't actually have to tell you you're free to leave.
Generally, no. That's a point that surprises people. There's usually no legal requirement for them to say, hey, just so you know, this is consensual, you can walk off.
Which, you can see how that could feel confusing or intimidating.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You can blur the lines. Okay, so level 2, up from consensual, is the detention. This is the Terry stop.
And this is where that reasonable articulable suspicion comes in, RAS.
Exactly. Now, they need that specific suspicion criminal activity is afoot. And crucially, at this point, you are not free to leave. You're being detained.
Okay, not free to leave.
And the sources point out something interesting, even just taking your ID and holding onto it for a bit. That act alone can often turn what felt like a casual chat into a legal detention, because a reasonable person wouldn't feel free to leave without their ID back.
Okay, that makes sense. So consensual detention, what's the top level?
The highest level is a full-blown arrest, and that requires the highest standard, probable cause.
Probable cause, meaning they have good reason to believe you have committed a crime.
Correct. Much higher bar than reasonable suspicion.
Correct.
Okay, so let's stick with that middle ground, the Terry stop, the detention. If it's a lawful stop, based on RAS, what can police actually do? What are the limits?
Right. What's allowed?
First off, the duration. It has to be brief. They can only hold you long enough to quickly check out that initial suspicion.
So they can't just hold you for hours while they try to find something.
No. The sources are clear on that. It's got to be reasonably short and tied to the purpose of the stop. If they want to move you down to the station or something, that usually needs probable cause or your consent. Just RAS isn't enough for that.
Okay. What about questions?
They can ask you questions related to why they stopped you, but, and the civil liberties sources really stress this, you generally don't have to answer.
You have the right to remain silent, even if you're not under arrest yet.
Generally, yes, regarding questions about your activities. You can politely state you wish to remain silent.
Was there a downside to not answering?
Well, the sources suggest it could potentially prolong the stop. If you're not answering, the officer might need more time to confirm or dispel their suspicion using other methods. So it's kind of a trade-off sometimes.
And I think I saw something about having to give your name in some places.
Yes, that's important. Some states have what are called stop and identify laws. In those states, if you're being lawfully detained under Terry, you might be required to provide your name.
Just your name, though.
Usually just basic identification, like your name. Refusing that in those specific states could potentially lead to an arrest for obstruction or a similar charge. But answering detailed questions about what you're doing is generally different.
Okay. Now, the frisk, the pat-down, do they always get to do that if they stop you?
No, absolutely not. This is a really critical point that comes up again and again in the sources. The frisk is only allowed if they have that separate, specific, reasonable suspicion that you are armed and dangerous.
So, separate RAS for being armed?
Yes. Just because they suspect you of, say, shoplifting, doesn't automatically mean they can frisk you. They need a reason to think you might have a weapon on top of the reason for the stop.
And the frisk itself, what can they do? Just pat down the outside?
Right. It's supposed to be a limited pat down of the outer clothing. But there's this thing called the plain field doctrine.
Plain field?
Yeah. If, during that lawful pat down for weapons, the officer feels something, and without squeezing or manipulating it, they immediately recognize it as contraband, like they instantly know it's a baggie of drugs or something.
Okay.
Then they can seize it.
Immediately recognize feels like the key phrase there.
It absolutely is. The sources emphasize they can't, feel a lump, think, maybe that's drugs, and then start rolling it around between their fingers to figure it out.
Ah, okay.
That goes beyond the scope of a weapons search. That's an illegal search, and any evidence found that way usually gets thrown out of court. The exclusionary rule.
Got it. So, what else are they not allowed to do during a Terry stop? What are the big no-nos?
Well, like we said, unnecessary duration. Can't take too long.
Right.
Excessive searching. Going beyond that limited weapon frisk without probable cause. And fundamentally, the whole stop has to be based on those specific and articulable facts. No vague hunches.
Okay. What about passengers? If a car gets pulled over, are the passengers automatically detained too?
Generally, yes, passengers are considered detained when the car is stopped. That's mostly justified by officer safety concerns during a traffic stop.
But can the police search the passengers just because the driver was stopped?
Not automatically.
Yeah.
The sources clarify that to detain a passenger specifically for their own suspected criminal activity or to frisk them, the police need separate reasonable suspicion about that specific passenger.
So just being in the car isn't enough suspicion on its own.
Right, you're not automatically suspect just by association in that moment.
Yeah.
And maybe the most important limitation, unlawful force. Using excessive force during any stop violates constitutional rights. That's a huge issue itself.
Okay, so that paints a picture of the original idea and the basic rules. But, these sources seem to spend a lot of time talking about how Terry has expanded, or maybe been stretched over the years.
Yeah, that's definitely a major theme. This is where it gets, well, a lot more complicated. The idea of officer safety, while obviously a legitimate concern,
Sure.
it's been used, according to these analyses, to justify broadening police powers quite a bit beyond that original Terry scenario. The imminent armed robbery suspicion.
How so? Like, what kind of expansions are we talking about?
Well, court cases over the years have pushed the boundaries. For example, the suspicion doesn't have to come just from what the officer sees firsthand anymore. It can come from, say, a reliable informant's tip, or even just recognizing someone from a wanted flyer can be enough for a stop.
And what about where the stop happens? Does that matter now?
It can, yeah. The sources point to cases where someone running away from police without any obvious reason, especially if it's in what's considered a high crime area, that flight itself can contribute to reasonable suspicion.
Okay. What about inside a car? You mentioned passengers, but what about searching the car itself?
That's another expansion. The Terry frisk idea has been extended to the passenger compartment of a car. If an officer has RAS to believe someone in the car might be dangerous and could grab a weapon from inside the car.
Like reach under the seat or something.
Exactly. The lunge area, they call it. They can do a limited search of that area just for weapons. Again, tied back to officer safety.
And then there's this other thing, pretext stops. That sounds important.
Oh, it's huge. The sources really highlight this. The Supreme Court basically said pretextual stops are constitutional.
Pretextual, meaning?
Meaning an officer can use a very minor traffic violation like, broken taillight, maybe not signaling properly, barely speeding, as the legal reason to pull a car over. But their real motive, their pretext, is actually to investigate something else entirely. Usually they're hoping to find drugs or guns or evidence of other crimes.
So the traffic ticket isn't the real point. It's just the excuse to stop and look around.
That's the concept.
Yeah.
And the huge concern raised across these sources is that this gives police enormous power to stop almost anyone, anytime, because minor traffic violations are so common.
Right. Who hasn't accidentally rolled through a stop sign slightly or something?
Exactly. And the fear is that this discretion makes it really easy for bias to creep in, leading to selective enforcement or racial profiling. If you can stop almost any car legally, who do you choose to stop?
Yeah, I can see how that would be a major point of contention, which leads right into, well, the controversies and the impacts these sources are talking about, especially race.
Yeah, this is unavoidable. It's a central thread through almost all the material we looked at. There's deep concern, backed by data presented in the sources, about implicit bias and really significant racial disparities.
Disparities in the tar, how often people are stopped, or what happens during the stop.
Both. Multiple sources cite data showing Black and Hispanic individuals are stopped more often, searched more often, and have force used against them more often compared to white individuals, even when you try to account for other factors.
And that holds up even when you look at specific types of stops.
It seems so based on the studies mentioned. Some sources reference research showing Black individuals are much more likely to have force used against them or have an officer draw a gun.
Wow.
Even when the initial reason for the stop wasn't suspicion of a crime, maybe just a traffic violation or something else. Traffic stop data analyses, like one mentioned from North Carolina, also point to these kinds of racial gaps in who gets pulled over and then who gets searched.
Do the sources try to explain why this might be happening? What are the drivers?
They touch on a few potential factors. One critique is that officer training or just street experience can sometimes, maybe unconsciously, lead officers to associate crime more with certain groups or neighborhoods than with specific observed actions. There's also discussion about how things like body language or verbal responses might be interpreted differently across cultures or races, potentially leading to misunderstandings that escalate things.
And police culture itself comes up too.
Yes. Some sources talk about how things like an emphasis on asserting authority or notions of respect maybe tied up with hypermasculinity in policing, could potentially lead to more confrontational or aggressive responses, particularly, the sources suggest, in interactions with men of color.
And beyond just the stop itself, the sources talk about the impact, the psychological effects.
That's framed really seriously, even as a public health issue in some of the material. Think about it. Being repeatedly stopped, questioned, frisked, especially if you feel it's unfair or based on your race, that can cause real harm. Fear, chronic stress, anxiety, maybe even PTSD-like symptoms for some people. It affects individuals and whole communities.
And it must damage trust, between communities and police.
Absolutely. Fundamentally, the sources talk about legal cynicism. People just stop believing the system is fair. They become less likely to cooperate with police, even if they're victims or witnesses of crime. It can lead to people disengaging from civic life, feeling alienated. It's a deep problem.
And it sounds like some sources even question if all these stops are actually effective at fighting serious crime.
That critique definitely comes up. Some analyses mentioned look at the actual hit rates, how often stops or frisks actually lead to finding weapons or arresting someone for a serious crime. And in many studies cited, those rates are pretty low, which leads to the argument that the widespread use of these stops might be causing significant harm to community relations for relatively little payoff in terms of crime prevention.
Okay, so given all that complexity, all the potential problems, what kind of practical advice do the sources offer? Like the ACLU source, what do they say someone should do if they find themselves stopped?
Okay, yeah, the ACLU guidance is pretty direct. First, and maybe most important, you have the right to remain silent. You generally don't have to answer questions like, where are you going? What are you doing here? They advise, stating clearly but politely, I wish to remain silent.
What about searches? If they ask to search you or your car?
You have the right to refuse consent. You can, and probably should, say clearly, I do not consent to a search.
Even if they might search anyway?
Yes. The sources point out they might still search if they believe they have probable cause, or if they're doing that limited weapon frisk based on RAS. But explicitly refusing consent is important for protecting your rights later if the search turns out to be illegal. Don't argue physically, but state your lack of consent.
And just generally, during the stop itself, what's the best way to handle it?
The advice is consistently, stay calm. Keep your hands where the officers can see them. Don't run, don't argue, resist, or obstruct them physically.
Okay.
If it's a traffic stop, pull over safely, turn off the engine, turn on the dome light at night, keep your hands on the steering wheel or dashboard, provide your license, registration, insurance when they ask for it. Basically, don't give them reasons to escalate.
And asking that question, am I free to go? When should you do that?
You can ask that pretty early on. It helps clarify whether you're just having a casual conversation, the consensual encounter, or if you're actually being detained and are not free to leave.
What if things go further? What if you are arrested?
The ACLU advice is crystal clear here. The moment you are arrested, say two things. I wish to remain silent, and I want a lawyer.
Immediately.
Immediately. And then actually remain silent. Don't answer any questions. Don't sign anything without your lawyer present. And remember, if you can't afford a lawyer, you have the right to have one appointed for you by the government.
Okay. What about if you're not the one being stopped, but you see it happening? You're a witness.
The sources say you generally have a First Amendment right to observe and record police activity in public places.
You can film it?
Yes, from a safe distance, and as long as you're not interfering with what the officers are doing. Police generally can't order you to stop recording just because they don't like it, and they definitely can't confiscate your phone or delete your footage without a warrant.
Yeah, that seems really important for accountability.
It really is. Although the sources also acknowledge the reality that sometimes officers might still tell you to stop or try to take your device, and you could face arrest for refusing, even if that order isn't lawful. It's complex on the ground. Also, some states have laws about informing people you're recording them, so that's something to be aware of.
Right. So if someone feels their rights were violated during a stop, what can they actually do about it afterwards?
The first step is documentation. Write down everything. Officer names, badge numbers, patrol car numbers, the agency, date, time, location, exactly what was said and done.
Details matter.
Immensely. Get names and contact info for any other witnesses. If you're injured, even slightly, get medical attention right away and take photos of the injuries.
And then who do you report it to?
You can usually file a formal written complaint with the police department's internal affairs division. Some places also have civilian review boards you can complain to. Sometimes you can file these anonymously.
Does filing a complaint usually lead to anything?
That's a point of frustration in some sources. Pursuing these things can be difficult. Filing a lawsuit, a civil rights case is also an option. But sources note it can be challenging, especially if there weren't significant physical injuries or financial losses to claim as damages.
Okay, so beyond individual actions, do the sources talk about bigger picture solutions, ways to fix some of these problems?
Yeah, there are several ideas floated. Changes in basic policing approaches, maybe less focus on aggressively enforcing minor violations, more on building community trust. Though even those alternative models have their own critiques mentioned.
What about training?
Reforming officer training comes up a lot. More emphasis on de-escalation techniques, communication skills, slowing things down, and importantly, training on implicit bias and procedural justice.
And maybe changing the rules for Terry stops themselves.
That's discussed too. Some suggest legally narrowing the scope, like maybe not allowing stops just based on reasonable suspicion for simple drug possession, for example, or using data to guide policy, focusing stops on situations where data actually shows a higher likelihood of finding weapons rather than casting such a wide net.
Data seems key again.
Absolutely. A huge push mentioned in the sources is for better, mandatory, transparent data collection. Tracking every stop, every frisk, every use of force, broken down by demographics.
Why is that so important?
Because without good data, it's hard to even know the true scope of the problem, to identify biased policing patterns, or to see if reforms are actually working. Initiatives to collect and publicize this data are seen as really vital.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive really shows how a legal tool designed for, a very specific safety situation.
Right, that suspected armed robbery in Terry.
How that's expanded over, 50 plus years into something much broader, much more frequently used?
Exactly. And that expansion, combined with how subjective things like reasonable suspicion or officer safety can be in the heat of the moment, that's really fueled these ongoing controversies, especially as the sources hammer home the way it disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities.
The data on race seems stark, and the sources really emphasize the human cost, the fear, the anxiety, the broken trust.
It really highlights this fundamental tension, doesn't it? Between needing tools for law enforcement to deal with potential danger quickly and protecting everyone's basic constitutional rights, their dignity, their safety, from potential overreach or bias.
So what's the big takeaway here? What should we be thinking about after digging through all this?
Well, reflecting on all these sources, I think the lingering question is really about balance and maybe about effectiveness. How can the system, the laws, the policies, the training, the oversight, how can it be adjusted so that police can address genuine, articulable threats effectively?
Right.
But without relying on tactics that erode the Fourth Amendment for so many, that disproportionately burden certain communities, and that ultimately undermine the very public trust needed for effective policing. Finding that balance, based on what we've read here, seems to be the critical ongoing challenge.
Thanks for tuning in to the Am I Free to Go podcast. Support the show by checking out our First Amendment gear, wear your rights proudly, and help us keep creating content like this. You can also join us on Patreon for access to uncut videos, outtakes, bloopers, and exclusive audio-only episodes. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell across all our channels. Links are in the description, and most importantly, we love reading your comments. Drop your ideas below, and you might hear your suggestion in a future episode.